Right, I want to take you straight now live to Greece because we have been keeping an eye on this vote in Parliament, and I want to show you these live scenes outside. People pretty excited and jumping and cheering outside. There we go. Yeah, let's take a look at what's happening there. People gathering outside expecting a vote to legalise same-sex marriage. Significant in Greece because it would be the first Christian Orthodox country to legalise same-sex marriage. So a huge moment for the supporters of that vote outside there. Now the vote by politicians is taking place inside. If you've been watching the last couple of hours, we've been keeping across and trying to work out exactly what's going to happen when. We can speak now to journalist in Greece, Nikos Efstathiou. Nico, can you tell us what's happening?
Yeah, so it seems that the expectations that we all had have been proven right, and the marriage equality bill is passing. Now, the support for the first articles, essentially the one that equates the right to marriage to same-sex couples, has been passed with 176 votes out of 300. So that's with a clear majority that, as I said earlier, indeed is comprised of multiple parties. That includes parts of the governing party, the New Democracy Centre-Right Party, as well as three left and centre-left opposition parties that sort of coalesced together and made sure that this bill is now a reality. This means that for many Greeks who are in same-sex relationships, their rights will be recognized, their kids will be protected, and so it's certainly cause for celebration for everybody who cares about equality and inclusion in Greece.
And just remind us of the background, because there's been strong opposition from the Orthodox Church.
Absolutely. So it certainly hasn't been an easy endeavor to get here. This is something that, as a discussion in public discourse, has started for a couple of months now. I would say since the summer, when Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis was re-elected, and he pledged that he will push forward with marriage equality. So for these past months, there has been some backlash from the most pious or more conservative parts of society, specifically a very vocal opposition from the church. So it's quite historic to see the majority of the MPs sort of going ahead and embracing this bill, and to also see support from a center-right wing party. And I have to say this is something similar to what we saw in the UK as well, where the marriage equality bill was put forth by the Tory government, David Cameron, at the time. So it's a similar situation here, where you saw these lawmakers sort of coming forth, and this really affected public opinion as well, which as of today stands in majority in favor of the rights of same-sex couples to both marry and adopt, just like everybody else does.
And yeah, let's get into some of the detail here, because the law on marriage, as you just mentioned, and adoption, but there are some nuances, things like surrogacy. Is that right?
Absolutely. So surrogacy is excluded from this bill. So there's obviously more sort of uncharted territory for LGBT activists that needs to be covered in the future. There's also a couple of other niche exceptions to the law, so not everybody's happy, but what people think is that this is certainly a stepping stone towards a much more inclusive and equal Greece. And they point to the fact that in other countries, when marriage equality was established, slowly, acceptance for LGBT people in society grew tremendously. And on the other hand, hate speech or violence against LGBT individuals has been decreased. And we've seen this in a lot of the other countries that have legislated for same-sex marriage, and we expect the same to happen here. You've been very right to point out that this is kind of a landmark case in the global context, because Greece does become the first majority Christian Orthodox country to establish marriage equality. It's also the easternmost country in the EU and the only one in Southeast Europe. I have to remind you, Italy hasn't done this yet. So it is certainly a landmark decision. It might be incomplete, but I think there's certainly plenty of reasons to celebrate.
And let's just touch on the politics again. Prime Minister here, centre-right. What's the significance of that?
The Prime Minister himself has come forth in support of this bill for quite a few years now, and he signaled his support towards the community. A couple of years ago, he established a committee to sort of form a roadmap for equality of LGBTQ citizens, and some of the more peripheral legislations there have been put forth, but a bit more quietly. I think there's significance here because there's certainly divisions within the New Democracy Party. I have to tell you that Adonis Samaras, the previous leader, you may remember him as a former Prime Minister of Greece at the times of the austerity crisis. He represents a much more conservative faction of that party. He really spoke against the bill earlier today. He does have his troops with him as well. So some of the government party's MPs did vote against this marriage equality bill, but the majority embraced it. And so the hope is that if the center-right party is sort of rallying behind a progressive cause, this is likely going to be reflected in society and sort of nudge more conservative voters, perhaps, to consider that this is probably a good thing for the equality, for city, and essentially for democracy and the state of human rights and civil liberties in the country.
Nico, thank you very much for that. Just going to see if there's, let's just take a quick listen in and see what's happening in these live pictures here. So no coincidence there with that song choice. Clearly, someone's had to think about that. Right, let's bring in our panel as we can just react to the news out of Greece. Claire Ainsley, your thoughts?
Well, it's great to see such a progressive piece of legislation being passed in Greece. Congratulations to the campaigners there. And it's great to have some good news because there's a lot of difficult issues going on in the world right now. So it's great that the Progress for Equality marches on.
Lan He, your thoughts?
Well, I think there's actually a number of jurisdictions here in the U.S. where this continues to be a very contentious issue, and actually some places where people would be surprised to hear, for example, there are still restrictions on these issues. For example, here in my state of California, there remains some restrictions that were put in place by voters maybe about a decade or two ago. And those are things that I imagine will be debated and discussed as we move ahead over the next couple of years here in the U.S., because there's no question that we are seeing this movement not just here in America, but obviously on the screen as you see around the world as well.
Indeed. Okay, plenty more reaction and coverage from Athens and Greece in a moment now, though, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.